right, what's up, y'all? This is Weezy from the What Is Truth podcast, an impromptu debate that I have today with my guest, Mr. Andrew McCarthy. He has a Twitter, and we met via Twitter, and it's been respectful. We even spoke a few minutes before coming on, and it was respectful. So, welcome, Mr. Andrew McCarthy. Oh, looks like you're mute.
Sorry, I didn't
No,
know.
you're,
Howdy, thanks for having me on.
yes, sir. Tell us, I mean, as much as you want to say about you, and so what we're doing today, we're gonna have a friendly back and forth on the moon landings, and it's been respectful, and it will stay that way. We are live on Twitter, Rockfin, Odyssey, um, so no editing or any of that stuff. But um, if you can give a give us a little taste, what you want about yourself, and then why you believe we made it to the moon, or if you want me to go to first, and I don't know, however you want to do this.
Sure, I could lead in a little bit, and then you can go, and we can go back and forth, whatever. I'll give a little bit of background about kind of why I am kind of so interested in this. Obviously, if you look at my Twitter, I actually work in the industry to a point. I'm a freelance astrophotographer, so I'm taking photos of space all night long. Which of course makes me very passionate about space and about humanity's footprint in space. This started with me as a young kid. My grandfather was ground support for the Apollo missions. Watched those missions unfold. He was friends with Gemini astronauts. So it was very much a part of my upbringing. And you could say a lot of things about that. You could say, "Oh, I was brainwashed from a young kid, you know, to love the moon landings." But it's like, man, it was part of my childhood. I grew up learning about them, and it was just passionately like, "Come on, let's go back to the moon." This is like, I mean, it's like there's no greater like voyage than like venturing out into space and discovering new things. So it's like I personally believe that not only, of course, the missions happened, but it was an incredible feat, both from an engineering standpoint and a political standpoint, that they even happened. And they happened 6 times. We had 6 missions that successfully landed. One, of course, that was unsuccessful, and then of course missions leading up to that, whatever. And that to me is just so amazing when you look at the politics of today and how difficult it is to get anything done through Congress. And I want to go back to that, where America united around a single passionate mission to send people into the void of space to do something incredible. And when I hear people, discount that now, people are born after the moon landings happened. It's very hard to, of course, to imagine them happening in the '60s, which just it does sound crazy. So I actually, while I'm very disappointed people don't believe the moon landings happened, I very respectful of their position because I kind of get it. I kind of get how ridiculous it seems. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Love the moon landings. Don't hate people that don't think they didn't happen, because I do get it. There's a lot of things about them where you're like, oh, is that how they did it? What So, and I guess that's a good segue into, I don't know, what are your thoughts, man? Why do you feel like they didn't happen?
Well, no, and I appreciate that, because we um, we all have our certain views. I once, I think, like most people, I think even the people that deny the moon landings, I think when you're a kid, you at some point daydreamed about being an astronaut, jumping around in space. I think we all have had that. I had
I
that
still
for,
do.
yeah, I had that, and I think what started it for me was going into the world of conspiracies. I used to believe government official narratives 100%. I didn't question it. There was a couple times during high school when I heard about certain things in the 60s and certain things that the government did, but I'm like, oh, that was just a long time ago. That stuff doesn't happen today. And then the 2016 election happened with Bernie Sanders. I was a big Bernie Sanders supporter, and to me, it seems so apparent that it was stolen. The nomination was stolen from him, and that that was a turning point in my life because I was like, holy smokes! If I saw this with my own eyes, this whole thing being stolen from him, what else have I been lied to about? And so I started having questions on other things. The moon landings was one that I didn't really want to. I was like, ah, that's kind of silly. Of course, we made it to the moon landings, we made it to the moon. And I watched some debunking videos, and I was like, well, and then I was 50-50, and um, I did go to Cocoa Beach because I live in Florida, and I went to the Kennedy Space Center, and I saw that lunar lander exhibit, and I was like, holy shit. I am very skeptical that this thing could survive a Florida hurricane, but I'm supposed to believe this thing made it to the moon and brought everyone back. And that was one of the points where I was going back and forth. Okay, did we not? Blah blah blah. And I'm just going back and forth in my mind. And then I followed the podcast by Neil deGrasse Tyson. I no longer follow it, but I used to follow it all the time. Star Talk. They had a show called um, it was Lunar Geology. I think I posted that clip, as a matter of fact, on Twitter. It was just a brief clip where Neil deGrasse Tyson says we no longer can make it to the moon with today's technology, and because this is one of those things when you get into debates about the moon landing. Oh, it's because of money. It's because we don't need to go there anymore. It's all these excuses, but the real reason is that we no longer have the technology. So we were able to do it in the 60s, but not today. And so that was the start of me going from being on the fence to now like, yeah, I don't believe it. And then there's a Reuters article from 2009 showing 200,000 tapes of the original moon landing missions have gone missing. We have the telemetry data has gone missing. We have all these things that if we're to believe that this is humanity's greatest achievement, probably of all human civilization, and we're losing all these things like nothing, I'm like, no, I I no longer believe. And so that's as brief. I mean, I can definitely dig into the details if you like, but I mean, that's kind of the flavor of why I don't believe. I
Okay.
think it's to me, and some people laugh at me that believe in the moon landings when I say this, but to me, it's an extraordinary claim to say that man landed on the moon. With it being an extraordinary claim, you need extraordinary evidence. And for me, that threshold has not been met. It's lackluster at best.
Great. Well, thank you for taking me through that. That's, I think see that echoed through most people I've talked to that question the moon landings. And, I can certainly agree with you that it's an extraordinary thing, man landing on the moon. And I do agree, extraordinary evidence is required. So a couple things that you said where I want to get into. First of all, you went to Kennedy Space Center. First of all, awesome place. Love that place. But you said you specifically saw a lander. Do you know which one it was, or like what it looked like?
No, I it's one that just looks flimsy.
Okay,
And,
so it was
and
probably
it
like
was an
so.
exhibit for it.
So was it like when you see photos of the moon and the astronaut holding the flag and there's a lander next to him? Was it that lander?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. And
so
I
you
think it was a model. Yeah,
it might have been a model, but they did have some they built that didn't go for Apollo 18. Apollo 18 ended up getting nixed by Nixon to put up Skylab instead. So they did have those things built that they didn't end up sending. So it might have been that you saw. But either way, you said specifically it wouldn't survive a Florida hurricane, and I 100% agree with you. That thing is not designed for any kind of atmosphere. It had to be protected within the fairing of the Saturn V ship. In fact, if any kind of wind hit it, it would tear the foil, which would expose the astronauts to radiation. So the entire thing is made out of etched aluminum. It's not actually made out of the foil that you see, because you probably saw it like covered in that gold foil. It looks like a flimsy foil. And a lot of people call that out. They're like, "Oh, it looks like cardboard and foil," but it's not. It's made out of, so the thickness of it's actually more akin to like, think of like a stop sign, right? How they look flimsy. They're made out of paper, but they'll cut your head off if you get hit by one. They're pretty solid because they're like, what, it was maybe like 3 millimeters of aluminum or something like that, which is not aluminum foil. They used this special chemically etched aluminum that made it super lightweight and thin, but kept its rigidity very strong. And you can look at all this engineering data is available for you. You can look it up. I don't have a link, sorry. That'd make it easier. But that was what was behind the foil. That was the pressure system that the astronauts were inside. It was not designed for any kind of atmosphere. It was not. It was not designed to do anything other than have them fairly gently let down. And there was, some shock absorption actually in the feet. There's 4 feet that go on it, that absorb some of the impact, and then very minimal G forces when they lift off again. Very, very small forces. Otherwise, the thing would fall apart. And it had to be designed that way because it had to be light enough to be able to lift off in that Saturn V rocket, go all the way to the moon, and then come back with minimal propellant. So yeah, that does look flimsy. I'll give you that. But from an engineering standpoint, it was designed to do a very, very specific job, and that was it. It didn't have to survive like re-entry, like the command module did. You look at the command module, that looks like a spacecraft. That looks like it could survive a Florida hurricane. So when you're comparing these different vehicles that had very different tasks, they do look very different because of that. Um, and now, that of course is just, going off on a bit of a rabbit hole about the landers, and you can counter to that in a minute. But I do have a couple other points I wanted to talk about. You specifically said, you quoted Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's actually many other people that have said that. Astronaut Don Pettit is also very famous for saying, "We can't go to the moon. We no longer have the technology." He's spot on. So, but when you think of technology, a lot of people think of like capability is technology. Like, we have the capability to make smartphones. That's a technology that we have the capability to make. Now, we have the capability in a sense that we can design rockets that go to the moon. We've done it in the 60s. We can do it today. We built the SLS. I'm not sure how much you follow along with the Artemis programs, but we currently have human-rated rockets that can get us to the moon. That technology exists. So that saying we no longer have the technology is actually no longer even accurate. But it actually makes a lot of sense too, because like in the after 1973, I think is when the last Saturn V flew. You can fact check me on that. After that, they were no longer manufacturing Saturn V rockets. The Saturn V rocket is what got us to the moon. So once they were no longer manufacturing them, the facilities were no longer used, and the infrastructure needed to build them no longer existed. So if you were to say, "Hey, I want to build a Ford Model T," you could say, "We don't have the technology to just build one. We would have to re-engineer all this infrastructure." It's an accurate thing to say. I don't think it's worded very carefully whatsoever, because it can be taken out of context, and you could say, well, does that mean don't have the technology now? We had it in the 60s. That doesn't make sense with how we use the word technology today. But in context, it does make sense because they literally, like throughout the 80s, we did not have the ability to go to the moon because we did not have a human rated rocket that was capable of that. So saying we don't have the technology is accurate. Um, anyways, that's just like a language thing, and it also could be considered just somebody slipping up too. Like, oh, somebody slipped up and like admitted we didn't actually go to the moon, or but even so, like, why would they phrase it like that? Like, we no longer have the technology isn't really any kind of confession either. It's because even if you take that at face value, it's saying that we had the technology at some point, so that would mean the missions did happen. So if you just like break down the language, it still kind of logically points to we did go to the moon. They just phrased it weirdly. And we can dissect that more if you want, but that's my take on that specific sentence that I've heard thrown around a lot. As far as the tapes going missing, I think I need a source for that, man, because I
Yeah,
haven't heard that
I got it.
200,000 tapes were missing before. So if that's a claim, then yeah, let's look into that because I I'm pretty sure all that stuff's still in the Apollo archives. They're archived both on NASA and all kinds of third-party sites. You can get the original 10 frame per second, thousands of hours of footage. Actually, maybe it's not thousands of hours, dozens of hours of footage, and then thousands of photos. They're all archived. You can look at the original scans from the medium format negatives. Actually, not
Uh,
negatives on that camera, I don't think, but
Here we go.
actually, you can look at the negatives, but the original scans from the Hasselblad medium format cameras they all should be there. Thousands and thousands of photos from every different camera. There's the data cam, those recorded the 10 frames per second video. A lot of that you see upscaled too. So there's like new releases of it where it's upscaled. But look at the original stuff because upscaled stuff, it adds weird interpolation artifacts that I'm not a fan of. All right, you got a source up here. I got to expand this. So it's just going to make it look like I'm no longer looking at the camera. Sorry. Yeah, so the original recording, so that's that telemetry tape that you were talked about. That was your second point. That was just Apollo 11 though. The rest of the missions are all intact. The telemetry data, the data cam that produced that 10 frame per second footage, that's all still available. They were part of a batch of 200,000 tapes to degauss, magnetically erase, and reuse the same money. Okay, that's just says part of a batch. It doesn't say that all 200,000 tapes are gone.
Yeah, that, that's that's pretty. I don't know.
Well,
It's
hold
pretty
on. Two
damning.
hundred thousand tapes. That's just like that doesn't specify that they're Apollo tapes. And I apologize. I'm just seeing this article for the first time, so I'm maybe there's context I'm missing. So
Yeah, and a lot of the NASA, the batch that came out in 2009, are around this time frame that this article was released, and so that's what makes a lot of people question a lot of the photos because uh, I don't know if you're aware, but Photoshop was used, and Photoshop says, "Oh, well, it's just the company we used. We didn't really Photoshop them." It's rather interesting stuff.
Photoshop came out in the '90s, man. This stuff's been around since like the '60s and
Yeah,
'70s. I
yeah,
mean, I grew up I grew up watching this stuff. Before Photoshop existed. I had old recordings like cassette tapes of like my grandpa gave to me that were of these original videos. They didn't like suddenly pop into existence 2009. They've been around. I grew up watching them.
and you can see though the photos that have been retouched from the originals, pre 2009, and then after the retouching, and a lot
Do
of
you have an
them they
example?
uh I had an astrophysicist, Dr. Raza. He brought in a lot of those photos from NASA, and it clearly shows if you put side by side the original versus the Photoshop version, it's, excuse the
Yeah,
pun, but it's night and day difference of the
yeah,
retouching.
I'd love to see it because what I look at is always from the source data because these things get passed around, they get compression artifacts, they look like crap. So I always go right to the source. I'm like, all right, let's see the original scans. Like I'm very much a photography purist. The raw data to me is paramount in my own work. So I always want to see original stuff like and move you
Yeah,
so I'm actually looking at the
I'd have
camera
to.
again.
It's definitely in my podcast that I did with Dr. Raza. Um, he was pulling up screen shares like this and using NASA photos and breaking them apart. I don't. I'd have to go look at the timestamps, but everyone is more than welcome to go revisit that conversation. Now,
Well, I mean,
what?
the reason is you're bringing this up as evidence in this conversation specifically about this. And so until, of course, I see the evidence, it's still just a claim. I have
Okay,
no idea what photo
fair
he's
enough.
talking about, where that photo
Yeah,
came from. It could have, unless it came specifically from like a NASA archive, it's not evidence because these photos get passed around by so many people. They get
yeah. No, this is
retouched by
this
people
is
that are
on the
just like,
Wayback
I
Machine
added
for
this.
NASA. So
Okay, yeah, bust it out. If you
yeah,
got a link or something out,
yeah.
we'll check it out and we'll look at it.
My link
Um,
is just listening to that entire episode because I
oh
mean
yeah, I'm
we
not gonna
did
do that,
this.
man.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying you're asking for evidence. That's my
Yeah.
evidence.
Okay.
We just did the spur of the moment, so it's just impossible. Oh
It's
yeah,
okay.
it's time.
Yeah, I know we did.
You
I
see
know we
what I'm
did.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
After
So
the chat though, if you can like track down like what's like specific photo is, because the way that the NASA image archives work is it's sorted by mission and then by instrument. So there's like 10 different instruments they used, or, you know, different lenses, different cameras, different data cams for their videos and their photos. And then specifically those instruments were then broken into batches. They each of them had like hundreds of images on them. So you can track down every single image that was captured during a NASA mission, and you can look at the original scans of those. And those are original on a site that hasn't been updated for like 20 years. So definitely
but
not since 2009. But you can pull it up and look at those original photos. You can see if they've been doctored because it's the original high resolution scan. um, and you can that's what you should be critiquing.
yeah, well, and there's more. I mean,
Yeah, good going.
I'm open to being wrong. Like maybe we did make it to the moon. Like
Uh,
if the evidence is sufficient, I I'm
uh,
open to it.
well,
My
have you ever dug into those archives?
uh what do you mean by digging in?
Well, I mean, so there's thousands of images
Yeah, yeah.
right? They're
I
published by third
couldn't
parties. They're
possibly
published on
look at
NASA's.
all of them.
Nobody
Yeah.
can. Nobody can. But have you ever just like gone into like a random one and then gone like, oh, let's just look at this and then just see what's in there. And then like on the actual like, because it's much different when you're seeing like the highlights, like the sexy photos that are in the magazines, versus like literally like here's the raw camera roll that Buzz Aldrin took on Apollo 11, like with like it was a medium format Hasselblad camera. It had I don't remember how many slides of film they used, but it was something. It was a few hundred for sure in Apollo 11 at least. And you literally just go through them sequentially, so you can kind of see the experience of the mission from the perspective of Buzz Aldrin.
So let me, I
And
guess,
I'll pop a link
touching
in
on
the
that.
chat here. Hang on,
Yeah.
I'll pop a link in the chat so you can actually see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Um,
So,
hold on one second.
staying with moon pictures and whatnot. I mean,
Yeah,
have you ever read books against the moon
I've read
landings?
books.
Like, well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I've
I
never
guess
read
like
a book against the moon landings, but I've gone down some pretty deep YouTube rabbit holes.
okay, David McGowan. He passed away, I think, in 2015. He was a legitimate journalist. Surprisingly, his Wikipedia doesn't um, trash him as a conspiracy theorist. He worked for legitimate journalist outlets. He wrote a short book, which is on my podcast. I uploaded the audiobook version on my podcast platforms, where he debunks the moon landings, and he was a former photographer as well by trade
Mhm.
as a journalist. And one of the points he makes is that we have to remember, I mean, we're living in days where you can point and shoot and your phones do all the exposing, everything's automatic. We have to remember that back in that time
Right.
everything was manual, and so they're wearing thick space gloves.
Hmm.
They've got a visor that's going to affect how they see the actual images on the viewfinder. And we're told to believe that they took some of these exquisite pictures. Obviously, there's a bunch of them that don't look good and whatever.
I
But I
actually have a
think that's
link for that right now. If you want it, hang on.
yeah, yeah. You can share screen it.
Uh,
It
I'll just pop the link in the chat if that's okay with you. Um, Forgive the site URL, but these are just it's a good consolidation. These can all be verified, through the NASA archives. These are official NASA photos. They're just the bad photos. They're very cherry picked, of course, but when you look at them, when you look at the photos sequentially, like in those archives, you'll see most of them are not magazine worthy. There's like one or two cherry picked out of hundreds that make it into the magazines, and they're just ended up being very famous. But most of them were bad. Like, and I'm a semi-professional photographer myself, I like to think. They got the basics wrong. Like rule of thirds is a photography thing, right? Like you want your composition broken up into thirds, keeping the horizon level. That's a very basic fundamental photography thing. They failed that every single time. It's only when the photo was, pulled off, they, kind of edited it a little bit in the darkroom to get it in the magazine. But their exposures were off more times than not. Their focus was off a lot. And by the way, you did mention, of course, they had thick gloves. Those cameras had to be modified specifically for them to use them. They used a distance finder to figure out focus, which is very simple. It was used for decades before we had autofocus. You simply adjust the distance, the distance scale on the camera, and it would focus for you. You're like, all right, focus to infinity, rack it all the way out. Focus to 30 feet because that's where Neil Armstrong is. Rack it in. And then otherwise, you just use a light meter and you can figure out what your exposure is going to be. Yeah, it's trickier than being able to hold it up to your visor, but they were still able to take photos. I apologize. I kind of went off on a tangent and interrupted yours. So
No, you're
I
fine.
just you specifically mentioned something. I was like, oh yeah, I got something good for that.
Yeah, no, I mean the photos are certainly something of contention because
Hmm.
um, people will talk about shadows,
Hmm.
intersecting shadows where they shouldn't be because we have a single light source, and so
Do you have a
um,
specific example?
mm, I, s- I don't. I have it
I
on
have
my
seen
phone.
that
Like,
claimed a
yeah,
lot. I just haven't seen an example that's not explained by simply vanishing points. Because parallel lines, of course, will always have a vanishing point in three-dimensional space unless they are perpendicular to the observer with a rectilinear lens. Of course, if
I
the
have
lens
it
is
on
not
my phone.
rectilinear, you'll end up getting some weird effects. But yeah, pull one up, throw it in the chat or something.
Yeah,
Man, I am not
yeah.
finding my
It
my stupid
it's a
archive
it's a
link.
good one because you can see a rock in the distance where the shadow's going somewhere else, and
Yeah, pull it
then
out.
yeah, it's a real good one. Um, what? So I'm sure you've heard of. While I find this, I'm sure you've probably heard the Stanley Kubrick name being thrown about.
Oh
Um,
yeah, he filmed the landings, obviously.
or inspired. I mean, I don't know one way or another. I mean, because one thing that people that believe in the moon landings, they'll say, like Neil deGrasse Tyson's one guy that I've heard say, he goes, back then it would have been a lot harder to fake it than just to get there, which to me is one of the most
Ah,
ridiculous things I've ever heard. I go, you've obviously never seen 2001 Space Odyssey
well,
by
have you
Stanley Kubrick.
compared the 2001: A Space Odyssey to the good like high definition footage from the moon?
I have, and I think Kubrick was a beast.
Well,
I
let's
don't
let's
know.
see the side by side.
Yeah, I
Because
and
I mean I love 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I mean
yeah,
you can tell they're matte paintings. I mean, especially going back with modern eyes, obviously, like we're a little bit more, I think, critical now than when that movie came out. But in all the lunar scenes, they're matte paintings, very obviously
yeah,
matte paintings. And
and
no, go ahead, continue.
that's how I feel about the NASA
You see matte
photographs
paintings?
as well. It's the same to me. See, like the point that you're making, I agree with. It looks
All right.
fake,
Well,
and
I mean,
That's the same way I feel about the NASA photos. They look fake, and to me, you see the perfect horizon in the background and all of them. Like the depth is lacking. To me,
right.
it's like, oh
Okay.
man, these.
Well, so you realize you've got two depth receptors in your brain. One of them is parallax. Your eyes are being set apart. That's why you have depth perception when you're looking at your desk and you say this is closer to me than that. Blah blah blah. When you look outside, there's a second depth perception indicator, and that's contrast. You look at mountains in the distance, you can tell that they're far away because of atmospheric haze reduces their contrast. On the moon, there is no such atmospheric haze. So mountains in the distance look close, and that's truly because that one sensor in your brain doesn't know how to compute what it's looking at. So in a vacuum, yeah, it's very hard to determine distance. And I see that called out a lot specifically, but it makes sense. It wouldn't be any other way. Now, if they're faking it, they might have been like, "Oh, make sure that the mountains in the background have less contrast, so your brain doesn't think it's close." But reality is not going to work that way.
All right, I just emailed it to myself, and um, so how do you feel about conspiracies in general? Do you because there's
You're,
some people that say they never happen. There's other people that will believe them if the government has admitted to them, and that's about the only time they'll believe them. And then there's people like me that if they're admitting to this heinous stuff, you don't think there's more heinous stuff going on that they will never admit to? I mean, and then there's people that will go further extreme and believe lizard peoples and flat
right,
earth
right,
and
right.
other stuff, so there's a varying amounts of degrees when it comes to that. Where do you stand?
Just wanted to jump in. I did just add the archive link to the chat. So if you wanted to peruse
Okay.
those while I'm talking, go ahead. So
You,
the conspiracy theories, I feel like first of all, that's a weaponized name created by the CIA, right?
yeah,
Specifically
in the
to cast
70s,
doubt on people that are reporting on things that they didn't want them reporting on.
the
Wanted to
JFK
reduce their
assassination.
credibility, right? So, first of all, if somebody says something's a conspiracy theory, I don't weigh that into whether or not I believe it. I look at the story itself. And the story itself, does it hold water? What's the evidence look like? Can it be challenged? Because if it can't be challenged, then I don't trust it. And that was my biggest issue coming out of the pandemic, right? We had this pandemic, and people weren't allowed to talk about anything that wasn't approved, basically. And it doesn't matter where you stand on the pandemic issues, like where you stand on vaccines or where you stand on like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine and all that stuff. The point is, good science is about conversation. Good science is being able to say, hey, I'm challenging this, so I'm going to try this and test it against that, and then having a discussion about what happened. And when that's not allowed, you're no longer having good science. And that to me is a huge red flag about any topic. So when it's a little bit of the Streisand effect, when you tell somebody not to talk about something, they're going to think about it nonstop, and it's going to live rent free in their minds. And it's obviously like that's what's going to happen when people are like, no, don't talk about the moon landings being fake, don't talk about flat earth. So I welcome people to talk about these things and ask questions, because I think that's just fundamentally good science. And that's how we get to these truths. Ultimately, the truth is discovered by people asking questions, sometimes difficult questions. If Galileo wasn't willing to challenge the church with his observations about what the moons and the planets were doing and the sun was doing, we might still have a very flawed understanding of our position in the universe. We need to sometimes challenge the status quo. So again, I applaud people that do that. And I have utmost respect for people like yourself that are asking questions about these things, especially when things don't add up. So no, I have no issues with what I will quote unquote conspiracy theories, because I think many times ultimately they turn out to be true.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah, I mean,
that's respectful.
and I'm probably get canceled now that I said that publicly, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories, or that were things that were called conspiracy theories, that did turn out to be true, and that's why I have no issues with conspiracy theories or people subscribing to them.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them do turn out to be true. If
Yeah,
if this
on my show, I have all kinds of different conversations. I've had Daniela Bolelli, world class historian, been on Joe Rogan's podcast. Big, I've had musicians, uh, everything. But my main focus is on conspiracies, and so the reason I focus on it is if you realize that you've been lied to, eh, next time some shenanigans get pulled, like COVID, to me this is all intertwined. I live in Florida. First week when COVID happened, I was already into conspiracy, so I was kind of skeptical. Wait, where's this going? I wore my damn mask for the first couple of weeks, and I worked in the garbage business. And whenever I had to do the dumpsters at the hospital, I remember shit. I remember being scared. And I'm like, man, if I'm gonna get COVID, it's gonna be right now. I'm picking up trash from a hospital. I'm sure it's infested. That was my understanding, at the time. I live in Venice, Florida. I worked through 3 different counties during the week in Florida. After a couple of weeks, I'm like, all right, none of my coworkers are falling down. I live in Venice, Florida, where the median age is 70 years old.
Damn.
And I'm not seeing piles of dead people. Everything I'm seeing on the TV is not happening here. It's a tourist town.
Right.
All this stuff. And I'm like, I know it's anecdotal. I completely get it. But I worked the 3 Florida counties, and everyone stopped masking for the most part after just a few weeks, maybe the first month. It was back to normal. While I'm seeing what's going on national television, I'm talking to my folks that live out west and how everything is locked down and closed. I'm like, wow, man, that's a whole different reality from mine. And my median age in my area is 70 years old. I'm a young buck. And none of this stuff is what it was. And meanwhile, I'm listening to doctors like Dr. Brett Weinstein, who said, why can't we go to the beach when COVID dies upon UV lighting immediately? He was saying this way back then.
Right.
And he
I
was
remember.
getting laughed at. He was getting ridiculed for it.
And vitamin D is like so good for your immune system. You'd want people outside to be able to fight this thing.
And
like,
all the things
yeah.
people were laughing and mocking him and canceling him over turned out to be true. Follow the science. To me, science became, especially during this COVID stuff, it became very dogmatic and unscientific. When you have someone like Dr. Fauci saying that if you question him, you are questioning science itself, that had to be one of the most unscientific statements I have ever heard.
I 100% agree with you.
I used to be a huge fan of science, and what started turning me off from this was how dogmatic it became, and how it was abused, and it just reaffirmed that you can't trust anything. You always have to double check. You have to question everything. If part of the scientific method, I've had Dr. Bruce Baird. He's an engineer who questions the 9/11 official story because of his engineering background, and that's what he says is lacking in science today. It's part of the scientific method to be questioning. If you have a theory and you're insulating yourself and you're not allowing to be criticized, that isn't science. I mean, it's complete horse manure, for lack of a better term. And so
I agree
reason
completely.
I'm bringing sorry, I got on my little high horse.
It's okay. Yeah, no, go for the rant. I'm just over here going, preach, brother.
well, and this all goes back to if you take into context the era of the 1960s, what happened during the 1960s? You had prominent assassinations. JFK is one that, even if you don't believe in conspiracies, a lot of people will, okay, I can see something going on. And to me, it's interesting how very few people know the details of the RFK. I've said this before on my show. The RFK assassination is even more proof that it was nonsense, because the official story in the RFK assassination is completely polar opposite to what the autopsy showed. So someone's lying. Either the autopsy's lying or the official narrative is. So that one is clear cut a conspiracy. Then you had Malcolm X. You had Martin Luther King. All government assassinations. We're told lone shooters in all these cases. So you had morale in that decade very low. You also had the buildup for Vietnam, tons of stuff. And so the reason that makes sense to me as to why we would fake, because this is the question, why would they fake it? Why this? This is why, because we needed a morale boost with all the nonsense that was going on, perpetuated by our government. So then you say that, and then you'll have other people, well, why haven't the Russians said anything? And lo and behold, we have Dmitry Rogozin, a former ex-cosmonaut for Russia, is saying that, yeah, Americans never landed on the moon. So that shuts down that claim. Well, the Russians would have talked. Well, now we have. And then you have Thomas Barron, a NASA safety inspector, who called into question the Apollo mission, saying they weren't safe. And before he is due to appear in hearings in a public hearing, what happens? A train crashes into his house and kills him and his whole family.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
It derailed apparently. Yeah, right before he's due to testify. So I'm bringing these just a couple of examples of many examples of whistleblowers because
It's okay.
you hear, well, there's someone would have said something. There would have been whistleblowers. There are whistleblowers, and so this all goes back into why the conspiracy stuff aspect is important, in my opinion. Because we see these shenanigans, whether it's COVID, whether it's other stuff. 9/11 is another one that I've had engineers. I live in Venice, Florida, where Muhammad Atta, the quote unquote lead hijacker, lived. And we were told that he was a devout Muslim, and yet we know he frequented strip clubs and flew in cocaine. Completely different from what the official narrative that gets spouted. So I see these lies and lies and lies. And so to me, not believing in the moon landings is not a leap, if you understand where I'm coming from, because I do have these questions. And I feel, I mean, even right now with Israel Palestine, I don't know where you fall into that. I think there's a lot of propaganda being played on both sides. On both sides. I mean, we're just constantly being barraged with propaganda. And I one final thing before I close out my rant is I'm bringing up certain points that I see people that believe in the moon landing constantly bring up. They say, well, it would have been a lot of people involved and blah blah blah. Well, not if it's decompartmentalized. You're gonna have a lot of people working, doing stuff, and they don't even know that they're assisting. And as far as keeping it a secret, people forget about the Manhattan Project. At the peak of it, the Manhattan Project, there were over 132,000 people working. They even made a fake town where all the people there were working for the Manhattan Project, but uh, they were playing roles. They were crisis actors, for lack of a better term, in the Manhattan Project. And so it's not far fetched to have a ton of people working on these top secret projects. There's plenty of examples. So sorry about that little long-winded
That's
rant,
okay.
but yeah.
Oh, you made some good points. A few points I disagree with, but we can cover those. I'll actually your last point I'm going to talk about first. You mentioned compartmentalization, which was actually going to be my counter to all this, because NASA, as far as programs go, was not compartmentalized. Yeah, obviously the Manhattan Project, very very compartmentalized. A lot of these other things you're saying were just not big programs, so there was no compartmentalization needed. Um, there's obviously a lot of classified information about all these assassinations and stuff. Like, we still don't have JFK files. I think they're locked up for like another 40 years or something. I don't remember exactly what's happening with that.
Yeah.
That's just an insult to the American people. But like, NASA, it's like it's all public. Like, it's literally it's like they literally just were like, here's everything. And it was like that from day one.
Well,
With
I
the
don't know.
exception of
Operation
some of the rocket
Paperclip.
tech.
I,
Yeah, no,
I guess
Operation Paperclip's
Operation
obviously what
Paperclip
people
was
bring up, but
hidden. Yeah, that was
of
hidden from the
of
public for a
course
long
of
time.
of course it was. You can't hire Nazis and expect without backlash. So yeah, no, there obviously that was hidden, and that's obviously the one example people bring up. But it's like we were at war. Like, it's hard to like see things from the perspective of us during the Cold War, when it's like you're literally trying to prove to the Soviets that you can put a nuke anywhere on the planet, and you have to be able to do that better than them. So you're gonna hire the best talent. So it's like, yeah, we got Werner von Braun, or however you say his name, and all these other Nazi scientists, because they were the best talent at the time. And yeah, there would be public backlash. We have politicians trying to win elections. They don't want to be seen as the ones giving Nazis jobs. So yeah, I get it was a bad thing that our government did. It was a very bad thing, but it was also a time at war where you kind of do bad things sometimes in war to win the war. It's I I I agree that Operation Paperclip was sketchy, but otherwise NASA, like as far as government programs go, obviously there's like government a billion government programs. A lot of them are sketchy. They're all bloated. They're all corrupt. I'm not a fan of government. I'm a big believer in small government. But NASA has not followed that status quo. They have been much more transparent. Literally, you look for something, you will find an answer. You're not going to see, up, it's classified. Up, sorry, the details of that project are hidden. There was a brief period where the rocket technology that they were using was a secret because they didn't want the Soviets to get it. But it's all public domain now. You can go in and look at the engineering for it, and if you understand rockets, which obviously a lot of people do, they'll be like, "Oh, we have the technology to take men to the moon. It's all right there." The people that understand this stuff and to the like very nitty gritty level all agree that we went. And that's
I don't
and that
know.
I think is the biggest like logic thing for me is like
I've had two astrophysicists, super intelligent guys,
so
and they
astrophysicists are really smart, right? But they also have very
super
niche,
intelligent
right?
guys, and
Look,
they're
you're a
saying no.
smart guy too. I'm a smart guy. We're all smart guys, but we also have areas of our education. And astrophysicists, every single one I've met, I would say I know more. I know more about most things than them, but they will school me like backwards and forwards on their specific field of study because their scope of knowledge is very narrow. And of course, I'm generalizing here. There's tons of people that break that mold. But astrophysicists are not rocket scientists. Astrophysicists are not going to be qualified necessarily to debunk the moon landing, and that's something they've specifically studied. And that sounds to me like people that are using their title to give themselves credibility. Granted, it gives them the credibility that they've had an education, but there's a lot of people that have had an education that like you wouldn't trust an astrophysicist to like remove your kidney, for example. It's just as an example. So unless I obviously listen to these conversations and specifically hear what they have to say, I'm not sure exactly where they're coming from, but we can get into that. And sorry, I did kind of cut you off there, so I apologize about that. I just
No, you're fine, man.
I do hear that a lot though. It's like you get somebody that has a title and then they use that title to push something that's not even in their wheelhouse. And that's it's just a fallacy. It's I
I
appreciate
understand
that
it.
they're smart people, but even smart people can get consumed by the or the wrong misinformation. You fall down the wrong
100%.
YouTube rabbit hole, and suddenly you're just like, "All right, cool, white supremacy's the way."
100%.
Like,
I
like
used to be a huge fan of Sam Harris. I felt his religious debates. I still feel the same way. Just because someone could be dead wrong in another doesn't mean you have to discount every other damn thing. There's people that could be completely dead off wrong, even if they're experts. And I'm using Sam Harris right now because when it comes to religious debating, I thought he would just destroy people in debates. I enjoyed him. I used to enjoy him. And then COVID broke his brain. And he's been proven over and over and wrong. And instead of admitting that he was wrong, he's been doubling down. And to me, that just makes me lose all respect for someone like that. If you're going to double down, even when confronted with the facts that you were wrong, 100% verifiably, and you just can't be man enough to admit it, I lose a lot of respect for people that way. So, but that's not to say he's an idiot or a dumbass. No, he's a very intelligent human being. So that's the part. But when it comes to these gentlemen, Dr. Raza, I consider a friend. I mean, we message each other rather frequently, and they back up what they speak of. I mean, Dr. Raza works for the Chinese Space Agency, which you may find interesting, and so he's very. It is his wheelhouse. I mean, this whole talking. Um, did so. Let's see, and you didn't. You, you didn't cut me off at all. I don't know. Have you seen this article here?
ex-Russian space chief claims NASA moon landings were fake. Wow. So what was he coming? Where was he coming from? That was the one that you mentioned earlier, right? The
Yeah,
Russian cosmonaut
yeah,
you're talking about.
yeah. I just
All right.
wanted to show. that this is the evidence. And
I
if you
mean,
look at the website, it's ifuckinglovescience.com.
so does he work for
IFOS.
Roscosmos or did he work for the Soviets? Who's he work for? Or who did he work for?
Let's see.
Oh, it's Roscosmos. So not the Soviets.
Yeah.
So he wasn't.
So
So was he alive during the moon landings? Like, what was going on with him?
yeah. Yep. Let's
Because
see.
I don't know. Like just like logically speaking, like why would the Soviets have backed us up? Like, why do you feel like they would have backed us up? Did we fool them, or were they like in on it for some reason?
See
Like, what
this
do you think?
this so my view on it's kind of a long-winded answer. Uh,
Okay,
I
well, make it
believe
as concise and easy to
I'm
understand as
trying
you can,
to.
because I'm kind of stupid.
Yeah. No, well, and it's hard because if you just start saying things, they're like, "Whoa, whoa, slow the hell down." This
It's
you're getting.
it's complicated. It's
It's
complicated.
complicated.
It's
It's
complicated
complicated.
to explain why we went, and I'm sure it's complicated to explain why we didn't. So yeah,
So
no, lay it on me, bro.
for me, it's we're in a, and it's gonna sound batshit crazy. I'm fully
Go,
aware. Some
dude.
of the stuff I say, it sounds crazy, and that's why if I had more time to explain it,
You know
they'd be like, "Oh, okay, I
the truth
understand where you're
sounds
coming
crazy
from."
too, man. So
Yeah,
you know it's
but
okay. Just go
I
ahead.
I, I feel like we're heading towards a form of global totalitarianism, and so you look at censorship going on. That's just why censors things, because you want to keep your populations under control. This is what they need to know. This is what's going to be fed to them, and this isn't even a conspiracy theory. You look at the church hearings from the 1970s. We found out that the CIA had was embedded in the media. This was in the 1970s. So a lot of people say, well, yeah, that was back then, but it doesn't happen now. Show me the evidence where they stopped, and we
Right.
still see it.
Yeah, I think I think I agree with that. I think we are heading towards like a one world global totalitarian
World Economic Forum is right here.
yeah. The World Economic Forum is becoming an unelected government, and that is terrifying. More people should be concerned about that. I think Americans have a right to challenge that very vocally and violently if needed. Hopefully, it doesn't get to violence, but at all costs, we need to maintain our freedom. Um, that's the most important thing, in my opinion, long term for the success of a civilization. And that's something that's very terrifyingly trickling away from us. That being said, though, you really think the Soviets, who we were at war with, were collaborating with our government?
I so one of the thoughts that I have, because if you look at the Russians' version of the moon landings, it's even sillier than the American one. So to me, it kind of makes us like, oh, well, we'll just take second place.
What
I
was silly about
feel.
it?
Have you seen their version of the lander?
Yeah, yeah, I have in the N1 rocket that unfortunately kept
It's
blowing up. Yeah.
yeah. To me, it's an even sillier attempt, just like the Chinese versions, in my opinion. Now,
So,
the,
I do strongly recommend you learn about the engineering challenges that went into this because you will have a lot more respect for the design of them. They do look ridiculous, but from an engineering standpoint, they're a thing of beauty. But I agree with you. They do look ridiculous. I actually have one right here on my desk. Check this guy out. I look at it every single day. All right. Looks
I have that in
ridiculous.
my space. I have that in my intro,
All
taking
right.
off with the little
So
digital sparks. No, it to me. See, this is where we can be looking at the same thing, and you are marveled at the ingenuity and maybe I'm speaking for you. I'm coming from the opposite. I'm like, I'm not buying it, man. To me,
how
I
would you
used to be
design one? I'm sorry, I did cut you off right there, but like
well.
literally, if you were gonna make a lunar lander, like how would you make it look? How would you design it?
I don't know. I'm not an engineer, so that I understand that's your
Right.
point. The
All right.
problem
So
is
no,
too.
that was my point. My point is you don't have the experience, the qualifications to challenge it. And I'm not going to say you need a college degree or anything like that, but it's like you haven't taken the effort to look into it deeply enough to know if it's truly silly or an engineering masterpiece.
And
And that's like, more power to you. You don't have the time to look into every little thing you think is silly, but if you do truly challenge this and you want to have debates with people on it, you need to go in, dig in, and see if it holds up when you look at it more closely.
I'm not disputing that. However, I'm also see, I used to be very religious myself. Very, very religious.
Same.
I no longer believe. And part of the reason why was I had all these questions and I started digging into it. And things that should have had a common sense answer, I was just giving all these weird runarounds and all these three-dimensional chess pieces to defend some atrocious parts in scripture and all this stuff. And so that, you know what, I'm not believing in it. The evidence is not good enough. And so in many ways this is similar to that stuff, because it's like, well, religious people will say, well, it's you're taking it out of context. You really need to understand that this is how things were done and the covenants and all that. And I'm like, no, man, if this is effed up, then it's effed up. And you better have a damn good reason why. And so when I look at this stuff, yeah, I'm not a damn engineer, but when the evidence presented is this, and this is the best we have, it's not cutting it. And I don't have to be an engineer to see the effery. I mean, we just talked about Operation Paperclip. For those that may never have heard, Werner von Braun was a top level Nazi, and a lot of the people that worked, the slaves that worked on his rockets, the slow ones would get killed. He was a bad dude, and his past was effectively scrubbed out. There's monuments to him, like he's some kind of hero, and very little is mentioned about his Nazi affiliations. And to me, that's a huge red flag. Why are they covering this up? And Operation Paperclip involved thousands of Nazi scientists. And then you look at Alan Dulles. Alan Dulles worked for American intelligence agency. He's connected to the Kennedy assassinations, and he was in bed with all these Nazis. And he's one of the main reasons why these Nazis got to come over here and avoid prosecution and war crimes. Meanwhile, the lower level guys were put on show for theater and tried and convicted. And so there's too many of these shenanigans that are afoot. And that's what makes me question it all. If NASA lied about, that's a huge lie. Keeping Operation Paperclip. I know you said, well, it's a war and bad things happen. To me, that's not good enough. It's we need transparency. And you mentioned the Kennedy files. Every president, it doesn't matter if it's Clinton or Trump or Biden, they all kick the can down the road. Let the other guys declassify. Why? Most of these people, if not all of them, are dead that were involved, but it's still being kicked off because of national security issues. That is complete and utter horseshit. And so I don't trust anything. A lot of these things that we were taught in school as fact, whether it's the Lee or Harvey Lee Oswald as lone gunman shooter, we're taught to the way they talk about it in school. It's like fact when it's bullshit. And so that's how I look at anything. I believe it's all propaganda mixed in with some truth. That doesn't mean there's everything is a damn lie. I'm sure there's bits of truths that get thrown in there from time to time. But bringing it back to the moon landings, Kennedy said we were going to make it to the moon, before the end of the decade. And when did we get back up there? Allegedly in 1969.
Yep.
And
July 1969 was the first time we put boots on the ground. We actually went up there in '68 and took a tour around the moon. So I think that also counts.
Yeah, I don't know.
I see your face change every single time I say something about the moon landings. You're just like, oh god.
No, it's just it's just to me. It's just like I stated earlier, man. I know we already came up on our hour, but
if we run over a little bit, it's not that big of a deal, man.
Just to me, again, I look at it as an extraordinary claim, to say that we put man on moon. And to me, the e- extraordinary evidence for it is the threshold is far from being met. And like I said, if there was some more stuff that made me look at it, you gave me those websites, I'm gonna look at it. Because
Yeah, look
one
at
of
it,
the
man.
things that I have with people is that you give them evidence, and a lot of times a lot of people don't want their own views challenged. I welcome challenging my views. I don't want to just hold, this is it, this, I'm not going to change, this is the way it is. I'm welcome to receive new information, and if it changes my whole outset, I'm more than open to do it. However, that threshold, and I have been going down the rabbit hole, as you can probably tell, based on some of this brief interaction. I have been looking into it. I've been looking at both sides. So, okay, what's the argument here? Okay, well, there's this. Okay, there's the argument for this. Well, what about this? And so I do look at it, and the more I look at it, it only seems to reaffirm my position that we never made it.
Well, the couple things that I'll, suggest to you. One of them, you specifically called out the lander a couple times. You had a video of it. Like, learn about how that thing worked. You'll look at the engineering behind it. Like, a lot of people call out that video does look weird, right? How it lifts up. Like, there's no plume or anything.
They forgot the cameraman.
That's honestly, that's such a lazy argument because, like, obviously, it's not that harder to remote adjust a remote tilt a camera. They actually, if anything, I think it's better. It's better evidence that we went because they tried that 2 times, and both times they weren't correcting for the lag, the 2.5 second lag between the operator and the camera, so they missed tracking the ascent module, and they nailed it on Apollo 17. But it was tricky because you're trying to track something in real time that has a 2.5 second delay. But they were ultimately able to do it. They had the guy in, it was controlled remotely from Houston by wire. It's not really that hard.
You
But
don't think it's really that hard?
it's no, if you can send a radio signal to the moon, which they can, they've got the deep space network there. They're able to send and receive communications to the moon, obviously, or else they couldn't talk to them. Then yeah, you can very easily send a command to a camera to tilt. It's not that it's not that big of a stretch with the technology at the time.
But
So, why do you think it wouldn't be possible? Is, I think, a better question.
well, you look at today in 2023, and there's
Hmm.
still a delay. You could be via internet with someone across the country, and there could be a couple seconds delay. And
That's, yeah. It's
the moon
the
landing.
speed of
So
light is the limit. The speed of light is a constant, and that's the limit. That's the fastest you can possibly send a signal.
now, are you aware of that? Bart Sabrell obtained this clip through a Freedom of Information Act, but it's a clip where the astronauts are caught. It's it's one of the most damning pieces, in my opinion. Bart Sabrell said that there's other stuff that's more damning, but in this particular clip, you're seeing a little. You're seeing what looks like planet Earth, and the rest is in the background. And we were later told the astronauts didn't realize this was being live, and they're manipulating with their hands pressed up on the window, making a sphere to represent Earth. And as they're communicating back and forth, you hear another voice going, one, two, like basically counting the second delayed respond, like one, two, okay, respond. So they were rehearsing what they were gonna do, and this was live. And how do you
And
explain that?
send that clip if you can, because yeah,
Yeah, I'll
that
send it to
sounds
you.
interesting. I'd love to look at it.
How do you explain something like that? I mean, to me, that's damning as hell. Because
I don't know. I'd have to see it, man.
once the astronaut moves out, he's doing those shenanigans with his hands on the glass.
Well,
Once he moves out of the way, they're clearly within orbit. So that's one of the theories that,
like,
um,
you mean a closer orbit, because they were in orbit the whole time. That's just, they're,
well,
whether it's a transfer orbit or lunar orbit, but
yeah, no,
you mean they were in
they're
a closer orbit, like a
closer
low Earth
orbit.
orbit.
Yeah, they
So I
were
think
they
I
were
actually did see that video, but
yeah, they were nowhere near space.
there was also, yeah, I thought it was the shape of the window. that was making it look like a sphere, not their
No,
hands.
no, 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 no.
All
He's
right.
doing it with his hands,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Send me that clip then. Make sure it's the same one I'm thinking of. But
yeah.
there's tons of video of the Earth being a sphere without that, and obviously photos of it being a sphere
But
without
this particular one, why would they need to fake it? Why would they need to do this hand gesture
that. Well,
and then have someone tell them, okay, we need to simulate a delay.
well, if they,
That's
it's entirely possible they were practicing for the communications that were happening later. Like I can kind of like see why you'd want to like practice that delay, because they'd be like, it's going to be a couple second delay. Let's get the hang of what that will sound like, so we're not cutting off the astronauts. Because otherwise, if you're like, hey, did you copy that? And they're like, right when they start talking. But I don't know if you've ever had like a Zoom call or something with like a really
yeah.
bad ping where there's like a 5 second delay. I used to do international sales and it was a freaking nightmare. It's like that I would always wait like a couple seconds and then ask my question again right when they're answering it. So it's possible that's what that was. But again, without seeing the video, I'm not too sure what I'm debating here. So yeah, send it to me, man. I'd love to check
Yeah, I'll
that out.
send it to you for sure.
What are your thoughts on other agencies photographing the landing sites?
So you're talking about the reflectors, right?
No, no, no. The reflectors you can only detect with laser. I'm talking about actual photographs of the landing sites. So, like both Israel and Japan have sent, obviously probes, landers around the moon, and they photograph the landing sites. They've got some pretty good details on them too. Like you can see the trails from the astronauts' footprints and everything.
My biggest issue is that you have to rely on third party stuff. That's my biggest thing. Like, supposedly there is a website. I think it's affiliated with NASA. Like, in order to see the stations, you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and you can see the tracks going in and out, and that's proof, quote unquote, that that's
Uh,
there.
what like you can't zoom in on them from Earth. Their orders of magnitude too small. You do have to get them from a probe. So I'm not sure
Yeah,
where you're zooming in from.
yeah, I'm not
uh,
entirely sure, but what I'm
uh,
trying to get at, it's a third party. You can't do that on your own. Same thing with the reflectors.
yeah,
There's
there
no
is a little
way
bit of trust involved in these photos, but they are other
there.
agencies, and like why like the logic here is like why would you bother to even fake something? Why not just like not take the photo at all if you're going to you know go send a probe there? If you're going to like why would you go out of your way to support this conspiracy theory by faking something like that? Because I've seen obviously the answer, they faked the Israel government's in on it, the Israel Space Agency is in on it, and like, I mean, maybe, but
It's similar
but
to
why
that.
would they bother to do that when like produce more evidence that could be scrutinized and analyzed and maybe people call fake? Like, wouldn't that just open yourself up for that? Like, unless if it was real, obviously you wouldn't have to worry about that. Like
To,
obviously people will still scrutinize, still call it fake, whatever. But if
uh,
it's real, you'll know that they would be wrong, and
well,
it's kind of the same
it's
logic in opening up
it,
the Apollo archives, honestly, because they could have
even
classified all that crap.
the it's similar to the Russians. Wouldn't the Russians? It's similar stuff to me.
Well, back then it's
It,
different logic though, because today it's like we already have all this stuff in the Apollo archives.
let's go. Okay, let me
All
try to
right.
make it easy.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah. Sorry.
Let's go back to COVID.
Hmm.
To me, when how did Russia, our enemies, handle COVID? Very similar to how the world handled COVID. And where were we getting these guidelines? So you see this complicity. What happened to several African leaders that didn't go along with the COVID narrative? Do you know?
I don't know.
They died mysteriously because they didn't want the jabs in their countries. So if you didn't fall in line,
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I mean the
that happened
I
to the
mean
Haitian leader.
I believe you. I believe you. I'd have to look into it.
This, but see, this
But
is what I'm
but
saying.
this is something like if it is a lie, it's a 60-year-old lie. Why
Yeah,
fan the
yeah.
flames by producing new evidence? Like draw more eyeballs to it.
Well,
Um,
they're still talking Artemis and SpaceX, Elon Musk is
So do you think like the Artemis missions, like we're sending people around the moon next year? Like do you think this is a part of it? Do you think it's an extension of this, or do you think that it's uh, like gonna happen for real finally?
so I'm this is one of those areas where I'm on the fence whether we can achieve space flight at all, um, or if it's even more nonsense. I don't know. I
Wait,
haven't
hold on.
committed.
So not just the moon landings, but space flight in general?
Yeah, this is where I deviate from my astrophysicist friends. My they believe space flight is possible. So this is where I deviate from
I
them.
mean,
I don't know. I'm not committing one way or another. I
yeah,
just
that's
think,
a completely different debate. In my opinion, a far easier one. I mean,
well,
go outside and take a photo of the
as
space
far as
station.
humans, no, I'm talking about like sending humans, um, like the whole International Space Center. That one, you see a lot of green screen, the exposed wires. If you're going to engineer something,
Yeah, send me those. I've seen those videos, man, and I've never seen anything convincing that looks like wires. I have friends that have been on the
no, no,
International
no. I'm
Space
talking
Station,
about
so it's like,
I'm talking about the engineering aspect. If you're going to make something and your things are floating around,
mhm.
the best way. I'm not an engineer, but wouldn't you want something where the exposed wires would be covered, and instead you see all this loose stuff hanging out and hairs, all this stuff? I'm very, very skeptical in that. Like I said, I haven't fully committed, so I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying.
It's
Like,
okay. It's okay. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I've got. It's okay. You're just asking questions. Yeah, it's hard for me. I'm going to have a very strong bias to the space station because, like I said, I'm friends with people who have been on it. So it's like, like obviously, I think it exists. I think people are go on it. I photograph it as a hobby, and I can see the radiators. I can see when they make changes to it, like when they put in new solar panels. I see the new solar panels. I see when they adjust them to make their spacewalks. And I have friends that have photographed astronauts on spacewalks from Earth. So it's like, I, in my opinion,
wait,
it's
they photographed astronauts
yeah, you can
walking it
see the
from Earth.
yeah, you can see the astronauts. It's hard because they're the astronauts are small. You need a big telescope. You need really good conditions. The conditions are something I struggle with. But when you have really good conditions and nice big optics and a good tracking mount because it's got to track it very fluidly, yeah, you can see the astronauts.
Hmm.
Yeah, they have to be outside
I'm
and
gonna look into it.
they have to
I'm
be
Yeah.
silhouetted by space or a shadow, but in sunlight themselves. Sebastian Voltmer got a good shot of one a couple years ago now with his 10 micron mount. And I believe it was a 11-inch scope. And I actually have a bigger scope than him, so I might be able to even get a better shot if conditions cooperate. But yeah, dude, it's possible. You can get them from Earth. So everything I've tracked about the station has been supported by the NASA official statements. So, like, you see the videos, the astronauts on the spacewalks, adjusting something in a solar panel. If you look at that and say CGI, and I'm looking at it from my ground-based telescope and saying what I'm seeing matches what NASA is saying is happening. It's like obviously I'm going to err on the side of I seem to believe NASA. It's like everything's checking out for me. So that's yeah. To me, it's not something I'm on the fence about because I've never seen a convincing counter argument, and my own personal experience shooting the thing has given me very, very compelling evidence that it's real. I I pretty damn sure it's real.
Yeah. You, I guess the for me one of the biggest things is that Operation Paperclip, the whole start of it.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree with that, and I agree with you. That's sketchy. So yeah, I
it's
mean,
sketchy as all hell. You're gonna hire, you're gonna
yeah,
put in charge the people that we went to war and we
yeah,
lost who
yep.
knows how many people in those nasty, atrocious wars. And now we're gonna celebrate you and build statues in your honor. That is morbid stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so again, that for me is one of the starting points as to, all right, so this was hidden, and it's a complete, it's a messed up thing to put these high level Nazis uh, in charge of this
Yeah.
prestigious quote unquote program. It's a huge black eye, uh, in my opinion, and that's just the start. And again, I don't want to rehash it, but just going back into the context of the entire decade of the volatile
Mhm.
1960s, um, to me, it only makes sense. And then
So
when you look at technology, everything seems to advance, but apparently with this technology, everything regressed. I mean, the spacesuits were able to withstand the harsh, uh, heat while being in direct sunlight, as well as the harsh cold
wait,
when they were not, in sunlight.
how well do you know your physics?
Not very good.
All right. So I'm gonna give you a very quick explanation of how this works because it's something I do see brought up a lot. They're like, how the hell it's 500 degrees in one hand, negative 200 in the other. How the hell do the astronauts stay alive? So in a vacuum, temperature is almost meaningless. So a given object has a heat capacity, right? It's why this can, when it's filled with a beverage, feels cold. But if you were to pick up a cold sponge or a piece of cloth, it doesn't immediately chill you. It's because it has less mass, and as having less mass has less capacity to store heat. A vacuum has zero mass, so they're like temperature is meaningless. It's just a measurement of stray particles that, yeah, those particles might be superheated, but if they strike you, they don't have enough energy to heat you up. So yeah, in this direct sunlight, you would heat up. So that's why the spacesuits, everything was always white because you need to reflect that energy away. But again, that's actually the same thing when you're standing out here in the sun. They're just getting more UV light. But it really wasn't that much different than say going to the top of a mountain in the snow and getting beaten in by the sun there. Obviously, we can survive that. The vacuum was the biggest challenge. Being able to engineer a spacesuit that doesn't just swell up like a balloon in a vacuum was the biggest challenge. The insulation against the elements, that's easy. An oven glove could handle that. And they just had overshoes on the bottom of their feet that protect them from that 400-degree lunar regolith because you can touch things in your 400-degree oven no problem if you're wearing a glove. They had multiple layers of insulation on their feet. Now, but otherwise, yeah, the elements, the extreme cold, that didn't matter. What was difficult actually was keeping the astronaut cool just because of their own body heat. Because normally you have air that slowly wicks away the heat from you because the air is interacting with your body and it's cooler than your body temperature. So it cools you down. And then when it gets hotter, you have evaporative cooling where your sweat evaporates and cools you. Now, in space, none of those things happen. So what they had to do was they had to run little tubes all across their body and run water through them to carry that heat away into a radiator that was on the back. Because the only way you can lose heat in space in a vacuum is by radiation. Normally, you have convection and conduction to also lose heat. In space, it's only radiation. That's the only way you can purge heat. So that was why they carried those big giant radiators on their back. It was partly their life support for their, keep pumping fresh oxygen in, carry away the carbon dioxide. But a big portion of that was literally just to keep the astronauts' own body heat from killing them. So, anyways, I hope that helps a little bit.
I I
But
think
when you dig in, the engineering's really cool. So I love
the
it.
Van Allen radiation belts is one of those issues as to why
Cool.
we
Lay it on
haven't
me,
got
man.
past through it. Um,
Do
and
you know
and
how much
so
radiation's in the Van Allen belts? Have you looked into the numbers? Because they sent out the Van Allen probe to study them right before the lunar missions. Um, so have you looked at those numbers to figure out how much radiation is in there?
no, no, I haven't.
All right. So radiation, you're bombarded with radiation right now.
X-rays are full of radiation, so I mean,
Well, everything is radiation. So the
yeah.
reason you see light is radiation that just happens to fall into that frequency of the visible light spectrum. So radiation is actually, for the most part, very, very harmless. There's just certain very, very short wave radiation that's damaging to you. X-rays are one of them. Gamma rays, very dangerous. But what you're the when they were passing through the Van Allen belts, they weren't getting a ton of radiation. It was very similar to about what you would get from a chest X-ray. And all of that data for the Van Allen belts is it's right there. It's public domain. You can look it up, see how many rads they were exposed to while they were passing through the Van Allen belts, and it wasn't that much. If you are a career pilot, career commercial pilot, you're exposed to far more radiation just because you got less of the atmosphere to absorb it when you're cruising at 35,000 feet. We get a lot of radiation just from flying commercial. But yeah, these guys, they didn't get a ton of radiation. They did get a nice big helping of it where you wouldn't want to linger too long, but it not nearly enough to kill them. Well under what's safe for like annual levels. Radiation will only be a problem when you look at very, very long duration lunar stays, and that's why they're looking at when you design some kind of lunar base, cover the top of it with lunar regolith, so that you have something to absorb the radiation. But otherwise, yeah, for a short little jaunt through the Van Allen belts, it's no big deal, man.
That and that's you see that when people bring up why haven't we been back in decades, that's one of the challenges that needs to be addressed. So if it's not a big deal, why is it still a challenge to this day?
Well, the Van Allen belts weren't really the challenge. They're actually the Van Allen belts are a bigger problem today than they were then, just because electronics today are a little bit less hardy, because they're so much more compact. So the ionizing radiation is a little bit more damaging for electronics, but they can be shielded. So it's not. I'm just kind of bringing that up as an aside that that would be the only reason that it would be more difficult. But shielding the electronics is actually very easy. But when you get to like more like the politics, like why we haven't gone back, like, look, man, we went 6 times. And after we beat the Soviets, there was kind of no point. It was a dick measuring contest with the Soviets. And once you no longer had the public support, and what did it cost? Like $287 billion in inflation adjusted dollars in the 60s. Um, and meanwhile, it wasn't really doing a lot of science. We found obviously a lot of interesting things in the lunar rocks that we brought back, but when you look at how much we spent to send physical humans there, it just didn't make sense, man. You can send a rover for like a very, very small fraction of that price and do just as much science. So once it became politically unpopular, it definitely didn't make sense financially. Because you take that budget and you put it towards, let's say, a space station. Like instead of Apollo 18, the Saturn V rocket launched up Skylab, which was America's first space station. We learned a lot more about what long duration stays in space do to the human body, and we were able to start studying things because we weren't focused on a lunar mission. So that budget that NASA had suddenly gets spread into all these science programs, and now the lunar missions, which don't yield as much science, are still insanely expensive. They just don't make sense. It's actually we're very lucky we're going to go back. That we're lucky that both the politics worked out, because usually these missions take longer than 10 years to plan, and we have an 8-year political cycle. Nobody wants to give the other guy a win, so it's kind of a miracle that the Artemis program continued under Biden, frankly. Um, but anyways, that's kind of a side. But the political challenges are really key here because everybody wants to get reelected, and nobody wants to make an unpopular decision with a huge funding thing like going to the moon.
You mentioned moon rocks, and some moon rocks, when tested, came back as petrified wood.
I thought it was just one. It was like one that was given as a gift or something.
And
There's over 700 pounds of moon rocks that were brought back over 6 missions, and those
Yeah,
are studied by independent geologists worldwide.
a lot of them have gone missing, surprisingly.
Well, people steal shit, people fake shit. Like obviously a very high value thing, so it makes sense that stuff like that would happen. So, do you
Not
doubt the
really,
existence of
because
the 700 pounds?
well, when you can get moon rocks that are just pieces of meteor. I mean, you
Right,
can get
right.
so. I
But
mean,
those will
to me,
obviously have a very
that's
different
super
signature on
easy.
them, geological signature.
To me, that's one of the. Well, Gerald White, he's a geologist. He not only is he an astrophysicist, he's a geologist, and he was talking about the moon rocks and some of those anomalies.
Did he study them firsthand? I know
No.
geologists that study them firsthand.
Yeah, it's. Let me see if I can find that article.
Yeah.
There's quite a few that are missing. Soon,
I didn't hear about them being missing. I did hear about the petrified wood one because obviously that gets brought up a lot.
And it would make sense if some of them are proven to be petrified wood. Like, oh shit, if they conduct, in my mind, if they
Like
do any more tests on me, these are
people,
gonna come back.
look, man.
So
If
they're
I'm
gonna go
like
missing.
if I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try to like give this high value gift to somebody, but I don't have anything cool. I'm just gonna tell them this is a moon rock. It's like I don't know. People
It's
fake
so
shit, man.
silly. It's
People
so
people
silly, but
fake
I can see
stuff, man.
that.
It's like
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, that's just like to me, that's just like a very obvious byproduct of having something high valuable. It's no different than like having people spray paint silver to look gold, or passing off cubic zirconia as a real diamond. It's just
Yeah.
people are gonna try to pass fakes for something that's high value.
But that's I guess, see, it's interesting how, we're seeing the same thing and just, I guess, taking different takes on it. Like for me, it seems
Well,
preposterous. Like, how the hell are
if
you
you
gonna lose moon
you
rocks?
if you have a valid scientific reason, they'll let you check them out. You can check out the people do it all the time for research papers. You can check out the moon rocks. They are still public domain. Yeah, the real ones, not the fake ones that were given to people as gifts or whatever.
No, this is fun. Um, I know, God, this is great. We did an hour and a half.
Yeah, we can call it, man. I should probably get back to work, but yeah,
Yeah.
you obviously you ask a lot of really great questions. And obviously when you have a bias, and I think we both started with a bias, it's much harder to reconcile with somebody else's version of the truth. And but I appreciate you coming along with me, and yeah, I do hope you look at some of the links I sent you. Like I think just honestly, just going through those 70 millimeter Hasselblad camera shots, it just paints the story of these missions so well, of just the lunar environment, and the kind of conditions they're working under, how difficult it was to get a good photograph in those conditions.
I will
And then
do that.
yeah, and
And,
obviously, if you
and,
have any
and
questions about like the lighting and stuff, man, I'm a professional astrophotographer. This is what I do. So analyzing these photos is very easy for me, but if you don't have that context or that experience, sometimes it's hard to know what you're looking at.
yeah, no, I'll definitely check out those links because, like I said, I do like to challenge my own beliefs. And I would just recommend my conversations with either Jera White or Dr. Raza. Um, the Dr. Raza one, he's showing the NASA photos and showing why they're wrong, and going through all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
I,
I
I
definitely
honestly, if you
recommend
can
that.
send me a photos, that'd be great. Frankly, I don't have a lot of time to listen to podcasts because it's very hard for my brain to listen to a podcast while I'm working, and I'm just consumed by work. So,
Okay.
taking the time for this conversation though is important to me because it's very rare I get to articulate out loud some of my advantages, and obviously hearing some of your perspectives coming from an actual voice instead of text on the internet is good. It's good for discourse, man. So, this was important to me to take the time.
No, it was awesome because I've been asking people uh, to come on and let's talk the moon landings. And I've had one guy that had a crap ton of YouTube followers. Oh yeah, yeah, I'll do it. Had another guy, big followers, and then just chicken out last second.
Yeah.
And you were awesome. You did
Oh,
it.
thanks, man.
We got in contact with each other. We definitely disagreed on this, but it was respectful. And to me, that's the awesome thing, that's what freedom of speech is really about. When you can have two opposing views, let the better let the better argument win. You don't censor. You talk it out and let people figure out, okay, well, he had a good point here, or maybe this point was weak, so I need to explore it. And that's all we got to do at the end of the day. So I can't thank you enough, man. You were a gentleman. um, truly enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, it's always interesting hearing other points of view, and it's and there's is there a chance I'm wrong? Absolutely. But it's like it's one of those things where I feel like the deeper I look, the more it seems to validate my position, and I'm sure you feel the same way. So,
Yeah.
you know what? Your beliefs don't hurt anybody. I hope mine don't. I just hope to God that we continue to get support for missions like this. So I hope your position doesn't affect that. I hope you hopefully look at the space program as a better way to spend our tax money than war. Uh, because that's,
I
in
I
my
do.
opinion, it's the alternate. Because these companies that build these rockets, they're either building those or missiles. I'd way
Yeah.
rather than build rockets. So that's
That's
Even
Yeah, that's
even
a
if
whole
it's fake,
different.
man, I want the support for that.
That's the, I guess that's a whole another conversation, but
Yeah, we don't
that's
have another
how I view
conversation.
NASA today. I mean, you're going to completely disagree with it, but I view it as money laundering operations because uh, the budget for 2023 was, what was it, 23 billion dollars or 32 something.
Yeah,
It was
sounds
it
about
was
right.
pretty massive this year. Um, and if it's all a ruse, like I think it is, okay, what's going on with this money? Well, perfect money laundering operation, in my opinion. And it's not the first time. I mean, right before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld on September 10th gets on TV saying that we can't account for $2.3 trillion. And then a few years ago, Forbes put out an article that 21 trillion is
Yep.
unaccounted for.
There's no
So
question there's corruption. I'm
yeah,
absolutely not going to disagree with you on that, but
but that's a different
um,
conversation.
that's a
That
completely different conversation.
Yeah, good stuff, my man. I do have your links. I have your Twitter. I do have the website. Is there any other things that you want to let the folks know?
I don't think so. Yeah, come say hi on my Twitter. That's probably where I'm most active, and I really do enjoy when these conversations play out publicly because, there's always a chance to educate. Answering common questions is very important to me. Um,
Yeah. No, and you were good, man. I mean, that's why I was looking forward to this because I was reading your replies. You're like, oh, you dumbass, you idiot. And, you stay away from ad
all right.
hominems, even though maybe some people may have attacked you, you kept your cool. Because I'm the same way. I'm arguing with people that do believe and they think I'm just a, a retard and a dumbass and
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So people get excited on both sides. And
Mhm.
real animated, um, you're not going to get anywhere. People are going to tune you out. Um,
Yep.
but if you're respectful with each other, like, even though I still am in disagreement with Mr. Andrew here, I'm listening to him, and it helps me understand where he's coming from,
All right.
what angle, and I have respect for that. So, I mean, that's the most important thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think even the people that scream at each other aren't that bad. They're just a little emboldened by the anonymity of the internet, and I'm sure they're good people
Yeah,
underneath. They just get a little excited, like you said. So, eh,
100%.
no judgment either way, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, my man. This was a lot of fun. You know what? I'm gonna follow you because I think you're cool as hell, man.
Thank
And
you. I hope you enjoy the
yeah,
photos.
yeah, no, for sure. And I'm gonna check out the links like I mentioned. So,
Yeah,
uh,
honestly, if you have any questions, my DMs are open, man. I do prefer if the conversations play out publicly, like I said. So feel free to tweet at me under my posts. And yeah, always happy to carry off the discussion.
beautiful, man. Thank you so much, my man. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday and get that work done.
Yeah, likewise, man. Take care.
All right, my brother. See ya.
See ya.
All right, y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed that. That was Andrew McCarthy. Links are at the bottom of the description there. Real cool dude. I really enjoy these types of conversations because a lot of times people get crazy and cussing each other out and swearing at each other. You're not going to get nowhere. People are going to tune you out immediately. So best way is just have open dialogue, civil. And I feel he was honest about his position. I was as honest as I could be, and that's when you get the most fruitful, engaging conversations, in my opinion. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Uh, Next week, I don't know if I have anything planned, but we shall see. But if you missed it, I did have Ryan Christian Saturday, and I had a UFC commentary show as well. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope everyone is doing great. Much love, hugs, and kisses to all.